Hello everyone. So the next topic which we will be going to study is about the amphibolic pathway. So in this we will be studying about the example of amphibolic pathway, which is the citric acid cycle. Then what is anabolic pathway, what is catabolic pathway, then why it is called as amphibolic pathway. We will be discussing all these in these presentations. So let's get started with the definition of metabolism. So metabolism, the word metabolism, it is derived from a Greek word which the meaning of that word was change. The meaning of the Greek word was change. So all the cell function as a biochemical factories. So within a living cell, biomolecules are constantly being synthesized and transformed into other biomolecules. So they are being transformed into other biomolecules. These synthesis and transformation constantly occur through enzyme catalyzed chemical reactions. They are constantly being occur through the enzyme catalyzed chemical reactions. Together, all the interconnected chemical reactions occurring within the cell is called as metabolism. So all these biochemical pathways which has been running in the cell is called as metabolism, which has derived from a Greek word which is known as change. So the metabolic pathways basically occurs in a series of linked chemical reactions called metabolic pathways. So in this we are basically discussing about what are the three types of metabolic pathways. It can be linear, that is glycolysis, cyclic, that is citric acid cycle, and spiral, that is biosynthesis of fatty acids. So metabolic pathways basically proceed in a stepwise manner. For example, they transform the substrate into the end product and through many specific chemical intermediates. Each step of metabolic pathway is catalyzed by a specific enzyme. In the below example basically, which is showing that there is a starting molecule, this is the A, then there is an enzyme, then the product B comes out, then there is enzyme 2, then the product 3 comes out, and all these things basically, I have said that it is a stepwise manner in which the transforming substrates into the end products through many chemical intermediates. So metabolic pathways can be linear, such as glycolysis, it can be cyclic, such as citric acid cycle, or it can be spiral, such as the synthesis of fatty acids. So flow of these metabolites through metabolic pathways have a definite rate and direction. So because of the biomolecules within the cells, they are in a continual state of degradation and resynthesis. So this is the dynamic state of body constituents. So metabolism basically serves as two fundamental purposes. First is the generation of energy into the vital functions, and the second is the synthesis of biological molecules. So the metabolism can be fundamentally occurring because of the two purposes. First is generation of energy and the second is the synthesis of biological molecules. So the metabolic pathways fall into two categories. First is anabolic pathways and the second is the catabolic pathways. So we will be discussing what are these pathways. So if the term anabolic comes to you, it comes in your mind, then it is basically what it is. It is the involvement in the synthesis of compounds and consume energy. Basically they are involved in the synthesis of the compound molecules and they consume the energy. So synthesis of amino acids or synthesis of polypeptide from the amino acids is an example of anabolic pathways. So A for anabolic and A for amino acids. So that means the synthesis of amino acids is the example of anabolic processes. Then comes the catabolic pathways. So catabolic pathways are involved in the oxidative breakdown of the large complex molecules and the release energy. So what are catabolic pathways? Catabolic pathways are involved in the breakdown of larger complex molecules and they release the energy. For example, if we take the example, living organisms, when for example, when glucose is degraded to lactic acid in a skeletal muscle, energy is being liberated. So example here is, when the glucose is degraded, glucose has been degraded into lactic acid in our muscles, skeletal muscles, so energy is being liberated. So the living organisms, they have learned to trap this energy liberated during degradation and they store it in the form of chemical bonds. As in, when needed, this bond energy is utilized for biosynthetic and mechanical works. So the most important form of energy currently in the living system is ATP. So the most important energy is in the form of ATP, that is the form of energy. Okay. So some of the pathways, they can be anabolic also, they can be catabolic also. So depending on the energy condition in the cell, they are referred to as anabolic, amphibolic pathways. So when pathways can be either anabolic or it can be catabolic, they can be referred to as amphibolic pathways. So they occur at crossroads of metabolism and acting link between anabolic and catabolic pathways. The example here is citric acid cycle, which is also known as Krebs cycle. So below the figure, in this figure basically it is depicting about the anabolic and the catabolic pathway. So as I have told that anabolic pathway is involved in the synthesis of compounds and consume energy. So they are basically small molecules that are assembled into larger one and energy is required. So these are some of the small molecules in which the energy is being required. So they comes to form this part. The small molecules converted into large molecules. But in catabolic pathway, it is the opposite of anabolic pathway. In this, the large molecules are broken down into smaller ones and the energy is released here. So one difference is that anabolic pathway will require the energy and the catabolic pathway will release the energy. The example of anabolic is the synthesis of amino acids, and the example of catabolic pathway is when the glucose is degraded to lactic acid in a skeletal muscle, energy is being liberated. So this is the example of amphibolic pathways. So the next example is Krebs cycle. The amphibolic pathway, example of amphibolic pathway is Krebs cycle. We will discuss this pathway in detail, but this is just a diagram to show how the Krebs cycle works. So this is basically a sequence of reactions in the living organism in oxidation of acetic acid or acetyl coenzyme A. They provides energy for the storage in the phosphate bonds as ATP, and this is called as citric acid cycle or tricarboxylic acid cycle. So here this is shown that pyruvate is being converted. In the glycolysis process, glucose gets converted into glucose 1,6-phosphate, then it converts to fructose, then converted to fructose 1,6-bisphosphate, and the end is the pyruvate. So it gets converted into acetyl coenzyme A, and acetyl coenzyme A here it enters the citric acid cycle. It gets converted to citrate by the action of enzyme called citrate synthase. Then it releases the water. It gets converted into cis acetyl, then D-isocitrate. In this NAD plus, it gets converted into NADH, and H plus molecules are being converted, and CO2 being is released. Then it is the alpha ketoglutarate. Then succinyl coenzyme A, it gets converted into succinate, then fumarate, then maltate, then oxyacetate, and the whole process will then it gets converted into citrate again. So the whole process gets converted into the citric acid cycle. So this is how a citric acid cycle behaves, and this is the example of amphibolic pathway. We will be discussing in detail about the citric acid cycle, that how the process is being done. There is an increase, there is a release in energy, then there is a utilization of energy also. So this is how a process works. So the legends are being depicted in the diagram here only, that what are the molecules being represented as. So all these things are represented. The reference for this is also given in the below slides, in the below part of the slide. So this is the references from which I have made the slides and taken the content from. Thank you.